it just really adds like a whole, it just makes it sound very, very way more stronger.
Howdy doody buckaroonies, and welcome back to another episode of Reverbing with Bavish. In this video, we'll be exploring 5 sinfully delicious ways you can cook up some new sounds this week. Of course, if you use any of these techniques for yourself and you come up with something cool, feel free to share it with me on social media or the Discord. I always love to hear what you're out there doing and what you're up to. Today's video is sponsored by my friends over at Noise Engineering, makers of some very highly regarded Eurorack modules who recently started releasing plugins as well. So in this video, we'll be utilizing their free plugin bundle, which comes with 2 synthesizers and a distortion, as well as their new plugin bundle 1, which features a polyphonic synthesizer, a percussion synthesizer, and a creative reverb effect. Noise Engineering's plugins are based on some of their most popular Eurorack modules, so it's a great way to get the magic of Eurorack in the DAW and even get a little bit of it for free. If you want to check out any of the plugins, you can find those linked down in the description below. First up on the list is Timestretching. Timestretching is a ton of fun, and it's a great way to make some really interesting sounds that are pretty hard to get otherwise. Here I've got Basimilus up, which is the percussion synthesizer, so by default it sounds kind of like a kick drum. So let's start experimenting with this and make kind of a bass sound to start with. We'll just hit random a few times and see what we get. I think that's kind of cool. There's a little bit of tone, but it also sort of sounds like a drum. Maybe we could switch the mode to metal. Now we've got kind of a cool snare thing here. Get out a bit of noise. Let's just shape this a little bit. Might be cool to modulate the fold here. So let's right click and do something maybe with the envelope. That's cool, it just adds a little bit more bite and snap to things. So let's record out just a few random hits here, just kind of plunking on the keyboard, and let's adjust the parameters and do that again. So first we'll bounce this out. Now we'll move over and just tweak the sound a little bit. With a little bit of tweaking, I've turned that into this, which I think is cool. It has a little bit more kind of a clean tone to it, but by spreading out the harmonics, we get kind of a weird tonal percussive sound. So let's record that out, maybe just a couple octaves of it. And we can use that for our second sound set. So let's bounce that and get to work. With the tonal sound, let's just start stretching this out a whole bunch and see what that kind of gives us. That could almost make like a bass line. Now that I've got that loaded in a sampler, I just ran it through a tuning plugin here. Just playing a C to make sure I'm getting a C. I was getting an F, so I just tuned the sample, and now we've got a playable kind of lo-fi key thing, which is neat. To make this a bit more interesting to listen to, I've got Desmodus here, which is the reverb plugin, and we can use this to build out sort of a long, washy, airy reverb. This has a really unique character to it because it's basically just a bunch of modulated delay lines. It's kind of like the way Valhalla Supermassive works, but a little bit different. So let's blend this fairly low and start experimenting with the parameters. Cool, I like the sound of that, so maybe we'll just move this filter point around a little bit and just get this sample sounding like we want it to. Which is a pretty cool sound for a percussion synthesizer. Now on the other end of the spectrum, let's start playing around with the drum sounds we made. I'm just gonna shorten this up and clean off all the nothingness, and we can start just stretching this out to some crazy, ridiculous value and see what we get. So with the regular stretch mode, we get some pretty nutty, granular percussive hits. That's pretty cool. I really like that first hit actually, so let's trim that out and start working with it. From this single time stretched hit, we could probably build an entire drum kit. So let's give this one more listen kind of critically. All right, I think we can make that work. So I think I'm gonna chop off the beginning here and make that a snare. There's a moment right around here where it's nice and bassy, and right about there, we've got some good air to everything. So I think we'll do something with these 3 hits. With a bit of added processing, I've taken those 3 hits and now turned them into a basic drum kit. I've got my kick drum here, a snare here, and a hi-hat. I've used things like EQ and distortion to sculpt and shape the sounds, then some convolution reverb to add some definition and tone and space. And on the hi-hat, I used a ring modulator with noise being the ring modulator to create that crispy, airy hi-hat feel. So with that, we've created this. Which I think is pretty cool because that was all made with a stretched out tail of a random percussive hit. Next up, creating overlapping rhythmic textures. This is a lot of fun. It sounds kind of like what you would get from a granular synth, but different, and it's a really interesting way to create paths and textures that move around a lot. Here I've got the Cursus synthesizer up, and typically this works best with velocity responsive patches. So I've designed a quick patch here that uses velocity to control a few parameters, as well as a good degree of modulation, including some noise in the modulation, so that it's never quite the same. Every hit is going to be a little bit different. Zooming out here, I'm just gonna hit record and just start playing a single note and maybe an octave, maybe even a fifth, just to get the basic texture. Cool, and I think that should be enough. So now we'll bounce this out, and we're gonna start chopping out these individual hits. This does take a minute, but it is worth it. With all these hits chopped apart, what we're gonna do is start moving them to new tracks and just create this sort of random overlap of individual notes. We don't want things to start at the same time, and we just want it to be spaced at whatever feels right, and you might kind of check yourself as you go just to make sure things feel okay. The result might sound a little bit messy, but that's fine. For the sake of doing this, you just gotta kind of wing it and see where you get. With these hits arranged, now we've got this. Which sounds a little bit all over the place, but that's okay. What we're gonna do now is go through and pan each of these tracks out. So with a bit of stereo width, now we've got this. Sounds pretty good to me. We'll group these together and we'll bounce out the final result. Loading the final result here into a sampler, I know I played the note C, so I've got my sampler tuned to C. We can play this, and now we've got this thing. Which is a really cool sort of pseudo-granular texture. By adding a loop mode, we can keep this cycling forever, and typically I really like ping pong loops because we'll get one going forward and then one going back, and as we hold out long sustained notes, it becomes this really interesting washy texture. I've added a filter here up the attack so that it doesn't really start right away. I've added Ruina just for a bit of heat and flavor, followed by Desmodus for this big washy reverb texture, and check out the sound of this now. And I think, as you can probably imagine, that sounds really cool with just about any sound. So that's a really fun thing to try. And it's even cooler if you combine different synth hits and different things to create the little pings. You can get these crazy textures that way. Sound design idea number 3, creating wavetables from drums. Drums have a lot of really rich, complex harmonic content, which makes them awesome for creating wavetables for your favorite synthesizers. This was popularized back in the days of all the cymatics bros, and I think was repopularized a bit by Virtual Riot doing this, and it's a lot of fun. With Basimilus open here, I've just randomized it a few times, and I got this kind of cool metallic, complex percussive hit. So I'm just gonna shape this a little bit to have a longer decay. That way we've got enough information to get a wavetable from, and just tweak the parameters a little bit until I get something interesting. All right, I think we've got 2 different examples we can use here. If I use skin mode, we get kind of a more traditional synthetic sound, and on metal mode, it's a lot more complex. So we're gonna render out 2 hits from that using a pretty low pitch, and that should give us enough of what we need. Here in Vital, we can import our one-shots, so we can try maybe that one first and try the different import modes to see what we get. That one's pretty cool. That's a bit more stable. I think I liked the second mode the best here, so we'll go into this and start designing a wavetable. Let's move the endpoint back a little bit to maybe right around here and see what we've got. Cool, and let's bring in the second one on the second oscillator. This second one sounds really cool. We just need to trim up the start and end of it here. Let's go for probably right around there, and we've got this. So we could probably combine these two and make one really cool wavetable. To do that, I'm gonna use this LFO to sweep through these tables here and set it to 4 seconds, and that way we can resample this to a new oscillator in Vital to get a final wavetable. Maybe we'll even go in and add a little bit of bend to one of these. Or both, I think that actually sounds really cool, and resynthesize this to a wavetable. With that resampled, we've got our final wavetable, which sounds like this. This is a really great way to make some complex sounding wavetables for bass design or pads or textures or anything else. Building off that last idea, another cool way to create wavetables and other weird sounds is by using distortion to shape waves, because that's what distortion does. Here I've got a patch from Cursus running into an oscilloscope, so we can see that here, and I've got Ruina with just the initialized settings, and we can use the blend to blend in the amount of distortion and see what happens to the waveform. So we can get some really complex waveforms just by using distortion. The noise engineering plugins have a lot of interesting wave shaping options inside of them, so we can also use that in combination with the distortion to create the final result. So if we play with just those parameters, we can see what effect that has on the final waveform here, like adjusting the width. We could adjust the tilt, parity, the folding, the edge, and I think you get the idea. So we can use this with automation to create an initial sound and then use the distortion to reshape that into the final sound. Using the synthesizer and some basic automation of the parameters, this is the initial result I've got. Which sounds pretty cool, but I think combined with the distortion, that's really gonna take this up a notch. Similar to the synthesizer, we can use automation in Ruina here to use the different distortion modes to shape the waveform over time. So this is a little bit of trial and error, but we're gonna do just the same concept here of applying automation to different parameters and creating the final result. With the automation from Ruina, we've now turned that waveform into this. Which, as you can see, is a lot more complex and should sound pretty cool. Bouncing that out and dragging it into Vital, we've now created this new wavetable. Which sounds pretty neat. That brings us to idea number 5. Last but not least, hitting the random button. This is one of my favorite sound design techniques because it gives you stuff you probably just wouldn't think of any other way. Obviously, this requires a plugin that allows some degree of randomization. All of the noise engineering plugins have this, and I pulled up some of my other favorites like Minimal Audio Rift, as well as Glitch Machine's Hysteresis here. Warning though, before you go doing this, always use a limiter on your session because sometimes hitting the random button is extremely dangerous for your hearing. Really what we're doing here is hitting the random button until we get good results. And what I like to do with this is simply record this out into my session and hit the random button, make some new sounds and keep going, and then cut out the good bits. As an example of what this could give you, I just hit randomized 2 or 3 times in each of these plugins and got this sound on the first real try. Which is like a huge aggressive synth sound. Going through this one more time, let's randomize the synth. That's kind of weird and kind of cool. Let's bring in Ruina and start randomizing that. Okay, that's pretty neat. Let's maybe drop these down. Let's grab some Rift and randomize that a few times. Cool, kind of a weird spacey hit. And finally, Hysteresis. Let's randomize that a bunch and see where we end up here. Kind of a cool atonal noisy thing. Maybe we could drop the sustain and release and make this into more of like a percussive hit. Maybe we could up the attack and have it kind of swell and make a riser out of it. Pretty neat, and I think you get the idea. So those are 5 easy sound design techniques you can go out and explore this week as your homework assignment, and let me know what you end up creating with it. Feel free to share the results with me on social media or the Discord. A big thank you to Noise Engineering for sponsoring today's video and sending along these plugins. If you want to check them out for yourself, you can find all those linked down in the description below. With that, I hope you enjoyed it, I hope you learned something, and as always, I hope this inspires you to get out there and make something awesome.